Banks have long served as the backbone of the American financial system, but our state is also home to the highest concentration of credit union assets per capita in the entire country. So for most people, you'd have to ask the question, what's the difference between a bank and a credit union? How do they work together, and how does that benefit our state? Howard Headley is the president and CEO of the Utah Bankers Association. Howard, I want to jump right in with the very most fundamental question. Help us understand the difference between banks and credit unions.
Well, Marty, I get that question all the time. And today it's getting harder and harder to tell the difference. I think people understand what a bank does, right? You put your money there. It's a safe place to keep it. You can access it when you need it. And when you're not using it, the bank can lend that money out and grow the economy. And usually those loans are based upon a person's ability to repay. It's some kind of measure of credit worthiness, right? And it's important that banks are careful about lending money because they're lending our deposits and we want our deposits back, so we need to get those loans back. A credit union actually makes loans in a different way, and that's what creates the opportunity. A credit union is exactly what its name suggests. It's a credit union where credit loans are made based upon a relationship between the people lending the money and the people borrowing the money. Because the people borrowing the money know the people lending the money, they're more likely to get a loan and they're more likely to pay it back. But what's happened over the years that makes it difficult to distinguish is that some credit unions wanted to expand beyond that union, beyond that common bond, and serve the general public, make loans to the general public just like a bank. And that's where things start to get very confusing.
You start to blur that line between the two.
Yeah, because if you think about it, the relationship between a credit union member, the union part, creates opportunities for loans that a bank can't make, right? Because I know you, you know me, I may give you a loan and you're likely to pay it back. And that doesn't exist in a bank setting. And that really helped poor people. So when credit unions were established in the 1930s, it was intended to help poor people get access to financial services, credit, loans.
The way most people think of that is probably from It's a Wonderful Life, right? They see a bank and they see a savings and loan, which was sort of a community type thing. That's the difference between the two, essentially, is what you're saying.
Yeah.
So how are they treated differently by government or by regulators? Is there a different approach when it comes to them? Because I think I understand that there's some type of difference in the way they're taxed or not taxed.
Yeah, and that kind of gets to the heart of the matter. Banks pay taxes like you and me and all other businesses. If they make a profit, they pay taxes on those profits. Credit unions don't have to do that. Credit unions retain hundreds of millions of dollars in profits from their members. These credit unions that have expanded and are operating like banks, but they retain those profits and those profits aren't taxed.
So how did we get to this point then? You start out as like, okay, a credit union is a system of trust and you're starting to lend and trying to help sort of the more impoverished people, right? And then you've got banks that are doing something different and they have a different criteria for lending out that money and what they have to contribute to the community. How did we get then to this point where we're at now where like it's hard to tell the difference between the two? Give me some of that history.
Well, the tax exemption actually made total sense when you had a small group of people lending money to each other in a credit union, a true credit union, creating new credit opportunities that didn't exist in the marketplace. There was no profit motive. They didn't retain more profits than they needed to serve their existing members. But as soon as a credit union expands beyond that union and is serving the general public, then they do have a profit motive. They have to retain profits from their members in order to expand and serve other people, new members. And so you've introduced a profit motive, and it's at that point where the tax treatment needs to be equalized.
So the tax exemption has something to do with them being a cooperative then, right? Like doesn't the fact that if they stop acting in that sort of initial structure, that's where the rub comes in. And now they're getting a tax advantage without acting like what they were set up to be when they were given that tax advantage.
Well, not exactly. Cooperatives pay taxes. There's hundreds of cooperatively owned banks. There's thousands of cooperative businesses in the country. And to the extent that a cooperative retains profits that they don't give back to the cooperative members, cooperatives pay taxes on those profits, okay? Tax exemptions aren't given to entities based upon their structure. Tax exemptions are given to entities based upon what they're doing that's good for society. And in this case, Congress determined, hey, credit unions are helping people, poor people, get loans, get access to financial services that they wouldn't have already had. And so the goal was to help poor people get access to credit. And that's why they were given the tax exemption. But as soon as a credit union goes beyond that union and is operating like a bank, they're making loans just like a bank. They're really not providing that benefit. In fact, the studies now show today that bankers serve the poor more than the credit unions who are getting the tax exemption for the poor.
So you had two different types of organizations, in some ways with similar but different missions, that they've grown to where that line between them is pretty fuzzy at this point. What's being done about that? Should the state legislature address that? Does it have to be addressed federally?
Well, to their credit, the state legislature already dealt with this issue almost 20 years ago. They drew a line and said, listen, when you cross this line, when you stop serving a small group of people where you can actually do unique things to help them, and you're now serving the general public, you're going to have to pay taxes like everybody else. Congress hasn't wanted to deal with it. And so most of the large credit unions that people confuse with a bank became federally chartered credit unions, and they continue to take advantage of the ambiguity that exists because Congress won't step in and do it. The state legislature actually wrote a resolution to Congress and said, you need to figure this out because these tax monies that they're not paying go to our schools. A lot of credit unions, the federal credit unions, don't pay sales taxes. Those monies go to our roads and to our police and our fire departments. And so the state wrote a letter to Congress saying, you got to get this fixed because you're eroding support for schools.
So I think for most Utahns trying to decide where to put their money or where to go bank, in quotations, whether that's a credit union or a bank, they see stadiums with names of financial institutions on them. They drive down the road and they're like, a credit union might look exactly like a bank to someone just saying, where am I going to go open a checking or a savings account? But I'm guessing for a lot of folks, like they don't really get or maybe to a certain extent even care about all this other tax implication on the other end. Why should they?
No, and they shouldn't. I mean, they shouldn't have to get into the details. People just want to be free to choose where they bank, right? Whatever's convenient, whatever, creates the best rates, the best returns.
Which one's closest to their house, right?
Exactly.
That kind of thing.
Best drive-through on the way home from work, whatever it might be. And that's the way it should be. But what they don't understand is that every time someone moves their money from a bank to a credit union, that erodes funding for their children's schools, or it erodes funding for their local police or fire departments. And that's just not right. People should be free to choose wherever they want to bank and not have to worry about what impact it might have on their kids' schools.
I don't want to open up a line of questioning that we don't have time for, but I'm wondering about this recent trend where we're seeing credit unions buying banks, and you would sort of think it might be the other way around. Can you give us an idea of why that's going on, or is that something we need to save for another conversation?
Well, it's a huge issue, and it's a real firestorm right now, and it's causing a lot of people to think about the issues that we've just talked about. And I think when Americans understand what's happening when a credit union buys a bank, they're going to be infuriated. But it's probably a little more technical than we have time for today. So maybe we can talk about it the next time we get together.
We'll save that for our next conversation. Howard Hedley is the president and CEO of the Utah Bankers Association.